This is CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the program. Our top stories: two of the most powerful men on the planet. President Xi Jinping welcomes Bill Gates to China, calling him an old friend, and says he hopes for an enduring friendship with the United States. Our other headlines: Kiev comes under attack as a delegation of African leaders arrives in Ukraine on a peace mission. 9 people arrested over that deadly sinking of a migrant boat off the Greek coast. Hundreds remain missing, presumed dead. And roofs blown off, trees uprooted, and thousands of people without power as a severe cyclone hits India and Pakistan. They are two of the most powerful men on the planet. China's President Xi Jinping has told Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates that he has hope in the American people. Gates is visiting China for the first time since 2019. President Xi called him the first American friend he's met in Beijing this year. Xi said the foundation of China-US relations lies with the people of the two countries, and that he hoped the two sides would work together. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Jung Chung-Ying, in Beijing. And Jung Chung-Ying, what's being discussed in Bill Gates' meeting with the Chinese president?
All right, thank you. As President Xi Jinping put it, Mr. Bill Gates was the very first American friend that the president has ever met in Beijing this year. During their talk, they have touched upon a variety of issues regarding the current global challenges like public health, climate change, poverty reduction, and also they've talked about the China-U.S. relations. The President Xi Jinping said, as you just mentioned, the American people are the foundation of China-U.S. relations, and that he hoped for a long-lasting friendship between the two peoples. And also, President Xi reiterated that China will not take hegemony, but rather work with other countries all around the world to achieve common development, common prosperity. He said that China is also willing to carry out extensive scientific research and technological innovation projects and collaborations with other countries all around the world to tackle the current challenges like public health, like climate change, etc. And on Bill Gates' side, he not only spoke highly of the achievements that have been made by China over the past few years when it comes to poverty reduction. He also pledged more efforts to support China and other developing countries when it comes to addressing global challenges like what I said earlier, like public health, pharmaceutical development, science and technology research, etc. In order to benefit not only China but also the rest of the world. That's all from me. Back to you.
Jung Chung-Ying in Beijing, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, ahead of that meeting with President Xi, Bill Gates told reporters Chinese innovators had an important role to play in global partnerships.
China has a lot of innovation and can play an amazing role here, drawing on successes that it's had in health, in agriculture, nutrition, and overall poverty reduction. I'm always impressed with the talent. I'd say that's something that grows every year, and fortunately the ambition of that talent is growing as well.
The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is preparing to fly to China this weekend for talks with his counterpart, Qin Gang. The trip was meant to take place in February, but was cancelled by Blinken after the United States shot down what it said was a Chinese spy balloon flying over its airspace. Let's talk to our correspondent, John Terrett in New York. John, what's Blinken's main task with this trip?
Well, Jamie, Antony Blinken is going to repair a very broken relationship. He's going to begin that process because everybody in the diplomatic community knows that the single most important bilateral relationship in the world is the one between Washington, D.C. and Beijing. It trumps all the others. Now, Antony Blinken is the most senior member of the Biden administration to go over to China since the time that Biden has been in office at the White House. And I think there's absolutely no coincidence whatsoever that Bill Gates is there now, and within the last couple of weeks China has had visits from Elon Musk to Shanghai and Jamie Dimon, the head of the biggest bank here, JP Morgan Chase, and this morning's news just being reported that Micron, the microchip maker that was banned from selling its gear in China just a few weeks ago, is investing $600 million in new jobs in China. So all of this is coming together. Now, Blinken, as you say, was due to go in February, but there was that, what President Biden called silly balloon incident, where a balloon from China went across the whole of the continental United States. The Americans say it was a spy balloon. China says it was a weather balloon. I don't think we'll ever know the answer to that. But both Blinken and Biden have been very rude about China in the last couple of years, most notably Blinken himself saying China is the most serious long-term threat to world order in a speech he delivered in Washington in May of 2022. And of course, under the Biden administration, there's been restriction after restriction after restriction imposed on Chinese companies and corporations and entities. And we're expecting more to come, despite this reach out by Antony Blinken over the weekend. Finally, Qin Gang, who we know well in Washington, D.C., he was the ambassador here, now the foreign minister, apparently speaking by telephone to Blinken on Tuesday and telling him to stop meddling. America should stop meddling, he said, in China's affairs. So that's the background to this meeting.
As you say, John, that's the background, the landscape these talks take place against. In terms of the agenda, talk us through the topics that are likely to be discussed.
Well, it's important to remember that hostilities and recriminations have been going on for 5 or 6 years now, and China is the bogeyman in America. You have to understand that. And there's no sign of that really letting up, at least not yet. Now, both sides, these are some of the things that they'll be talking about. Both sides have taken action, both rhetorically and physically, regarding Taiwan and in the Taiwan Strait. Both sides have taken action rhetorically and physically regarding the South China Sea and the island bases that China is building there, regarding navigation and air and sea near misses and things like that. The U.S. is very concerned about Beijing's relationship with Moscow, but Beijing says, look, you know, we are putting a major peace plan together to try and bring the special operation in Ukraine to a close. And this is a major part and part of the reason why we're talking still to President Putin. And there are other peace plans on the table as well, including from the UK and the US and Iraq, oddly enough, and also South Africa. There are counterclaims about whether or not China spies on Americans and whether or not it steals technology. China says, look, you want to work with our billion-plus population, then you've got to help us out a little bit as well and tell us some of your business secrets. There are concerns about defense. Neither side has spoken about how they would actually avoid a war between them for quite some time. And, of course, human rights as well, including in Shanghai and Hong Kong, and now fentanyl coming over the U.S. southern border, which is believed to originate in China. Analysts don't expect any breakthrough coming up from this weekend, but they do see it as a way of paving the way for other high-profile U.S. politicians to go to China in the immediate future. Jamie?
John, thank you for that. Our correspondent John Terrett in New York. Explosions and air raid sirens have been heard in Kiev as African leaders begin a peace mission aimed at trying to mediate between Ukraine and Russia. The delegation, which includes leaders from South Africa, Senegal and Egypt, started their trip with a visit to Bucha, north of the Ukrainian capital, where international investigators are collecting evidence of war crimes. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Adel Al-Marouki in the Egyptian city of Alexandria. Adel, explosions as these African leaders arrive on a peace mission. It's an extraordinary start to this visit, isn't it?
It definitely exactly is, Jamie. We have heard from the Egyptian Prime Minister's office, who is the representative for the Egyptian president in that visit, that the Egyptian delegation has taken a 12-hour long ride train to reach the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, to begin and become part of a 6 leaders mission that aims to set an African initiative into place. African leaders, according to South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, says that Africa will no longer be a pawn in a global polarized conflict that is Ukraine versus Russia, and as world powers have been trying to polarize African countries into that conflict. So this is a stance from Africa to show, first of all, non-alignment into that conflict and prioritize the benefits of Africa, which is primarily food security. Africa has been, according to many experts in Africa, the United Nations and the World Bank, every international organization have confirmed that Africa has been the most affected by that conflict, as the country heavily relies on food exports from Russia and Ukraine.
I was going to ask you, I mean, what are the African leaders hoping to achieve with their mission? But I guess that's part of the story here, isn't it?
Well, food talks is definitely the prime motivator for African leaders, but this is not what they're trying to achieve. According to some leaked information, not official through the African Union yet, is that African leaders are trying to reach a calm, to rebuild trust between Russia and Ukraine. That is through several steps that they are initiating or proposing for both sides. First, from the Ukrainian side, to step down all accusations against President Putin, any arrest warrants issued against him, any chasing at the ICC or ICJ against President Putin, to show interest or willingness to participate in dialogue. Also, they are trying to push Ukraine into convincing the West into reducing its sanctions against Russia. And from the Russian side, they are aiming during their talks with President Putin that is scheduled to take place on Saturday to convince him to start de-escalating in terms of military action, withdraw some tactical and strategic military expansion or military tactical units inside Belarusia, for example, as a sign of de-escalation to the tension around Ukraine and creating a buffer zone. The aim basically is to create calm and begin direct talks between the Russians and the Ukrainians. That's what the AU mission leaders from Africa are trying to achieve this week.
Adel, good to see you. Thanks for that. Our correspondent, Adel Al-Marouki in Alexandria in Egypt. The Kremlin says Vladimir Putin remains open to solutions to end the conflict with Ukraine. The Russian president has been speaking at the country's annual economic forum in St. Petersburg, which has seen a number of absences of US and European multinationals and business leaders. He says Russia's economy has weathered the storm in the face of sweeping Western sanctions.
In April of this year, Russia's GDP grew by 3.3% in annual terms, and by the end of the year, it will add more than 1%. Well, anyway, according to the IMF, 0.7%. But in my opinion, and I agree with those of our experts who believe that the growth will be even more, somewhere up to 1.5% and maybe even under 2%. And this will allow our country to maintain its place among the world's leading economies.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, tens of thousands of people are forced to leave their homes as Cyclone Bipedja makes landfall in Pakistan.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect, how we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. President Xi Jinping welcomes Bill Gates to China, calling him an old friend, and says he hopes for an enduring friendship with the United States. Our other headlines: Kiev comes under attack as a delegation of African leaders arrives in Ukraine on a peace mission. 9 people have now been arrested over that deadly shipwreck off Greece. At least 78 people were killed when a fishing trawler packed with migrants capsized and sank on Wednesday. Witnesses suggest between 400 and 750 people were on board, prompting the United Nations Human Rights Chief to call for a clampdown on people smugglers. Our correspondent Evangelo Sipsas is in Kalamata, where the survivors have been taken. Evangelo, what's the latest you have for us on the investigation?
Well, those 9 people that you mentioned that were arrested are still behind bars. They're going to be appearing in front of a judge sometime on Monday, but charges have been laid against them already. Charges of being part of a criminal organization, charges of causing bodily harm, causing deaths, but also for illegal entry. Now, that's what we know so far about these 9 people that have been arrested. Now, the migrants that were here earlier, the last migrants that were here were taken with 2 buses to Malakasa, which is an asylum center. They've been taken there for better, perhaps, conditions so they can be identified and perhaps be reunited with their loved ones. So that's what the scene is like here in Kalamata right now from the refugees themselves. But what's going on today is a lot of the relatives have flown from around the world to perhaps find any information of where their loved ones might be. Just right behind me, you can see a number of people that came in from Egypt, from Libya, from even parts of Germany, the United Kingdom, to find any sign of their loved ones. We spoke to some of those people, and this is what they had to tell us.
My brother-in-law is still missing. We don't know where he is. We have no information of what happened. I cannot think about anything. I'm happy I found my brother, but I'm still worried about my brother-in-law.
Evangelo, what else do we know about the victims?
Well, we do know that a number of them were admitted in hospital with in serious conditions of hypothermia. A lot of them were in shock. A lot of them were suffering from severe burns because they were over 5 days in the sea underneath that sun. We spoke to some of those doctors. They were telling us that most of the people that were there were men in their 20s. But it's very interesting to point out that the hospital here, along with the trauma centers and medical staff, were prepared to receive women and children, which, as they say, they never saw.
We sent to the port gynecologists and doctors for children. From our experience, when refugees arrive, many are children. Children that are young in age, or women that are pregnant and are at sea for days. But unfortunately, our colleagues didn't see any children or women. And later on, the Coast Guard told us that most of them were locked in the lower deck of the boat and didn't make it.
And unfortunately, that what a lot of the eyewitnesses are saying, that women and children were locked in the lower deck. So if that is indeed the case, as the time is going by and the hours and the minutes and the days are going by, perhaps to find those people, the chances of finding them are actually becoming slimmer. But we're going to be continuing with providing any more updates from the scene here and the centers where the asylum seekers are taken.
Evangelo, we'll see you in coming hours. For the moment, thank you for that. Our correspondent Evangelo Sipsas in Kalamata in Greece. Pakistan has been hit by strong winds and heavy rain as Cyclone Bipedja made landfall. Tens of thousands of people were moved to safer areas ahead of its arrival. Our correspondent Daniel Khan reports.
According to the Pakistan government, over 80,000 people in vulnerable areas have been relocated with the help of the Army, Navy, Rangers and police.
We have provided them basic facilities actually, because it's not a luxury to be displaced. So the first point is we are at the same time evacuating people. So the things are in parallel. We are evacuating people, at the same time we are accommodating them.
63 schools and government buildings have been transformed into makeshift camps for the displaced. We've just arrived at the TCF school, which is located in Garo, about 20 kilometers from the KT Bandar, where the cyclone is expected to make landfall. And the assistant commissioner has told me that about 104 families have been given a temporary shelter here till the cyclone and the storms subside. The local administration is providing cooked food and clean water at the relief camps, while 86 medical units have also been deployed in the field.
I have seen mostly cases, diarrhea cases and malaria cases. So now waterborne disease, mostly cases diarrhea, skin diseases and malaria cases.
The displaced people anxiously await the end of the cyclone so they can go back home. The government has provided us with everything, but my children are distressed. My family is praying day and night to Allah to end this cyclone. But even when the storms fade away, their trials will not end, as their homes have been submerged and their livelihood lost. And it may take many years to rebuild their lives. Daniel Khan, CGTN, Tata, Southeast Pakistan.
A deadly tornado has swept through a Texas town, killing 3 people and injuring dozens more. Emergency crews have been searching for survivors in Perryton after at least 30 mobile homes were destroyed or damaged. This is the 4th time the town has been hit by a tornado in as many years. Japan has raised the age of consent from 13 to 16 as part of reforms to sex crime legislation. The new bill also broadens the definition of rape from forcible sexual intercourse to non-consensual sexual intercourse and criminalises voyeurism. A separate bill promoting better understanding of LGBT issues was also passed, but critics say it offers no legal protection. For many people in Hungary, popping out to do the shopping has become rather more complicated in recent months. Record food inflation and the devaluation of the Hungarian currency is pushing consumers to travel across the border in search of bargains. Our correspondent Pablo Gutierrez reports.
An international journey often starts on this bridge to Slovakia. The reason? Food inflation in Hungary is currently running at a record 45%, which means for every $100 spent on food, shoppers will pay around 45 more than they did a year ago. So for many, the trip across the border is worth every cent.
You can see the price difference in groceries from one country to another. I think it's not only inflation, but a weak Hungarian forint that's hurting us.
Hungary's forint has devaluated nearly 25% against the dollar since the Ukraine conflict began, and currently is the worst performing currency in Central and Eastern Europe.
The Hungarian forint is so fragile and lost so much of its value that for producers it makes sense to export. So Hungarian products are just leaving the market because it makes sense to export.
It is one of the reasons border towns like Komárno in Slovakia have seen an increase in Hungarians doing their weekly shop. While that might be good for businesses, not everyone is thrilled.
Shops are getting crowded, so for us it's not really good because we go in and it's packed.
Day trips outside Hungary have increased by 35%, with most travelers going to Slovakia and Austria, and most respondents saying they went to buy food, according to the Hungarian Central Statistical Office. Hungarians have spent $162 million in Austria and $55 million in Slovakia this year.
Take, for instance, the price of paprikas, one of Hungary's primary exports. Here in Budapest, you will pay about $2 per kilo. Well, in Slovakia, it will cost you about $1.60.
The Hungarian government imposed price caps on 6-food staples, including flour, sugar, eggs, and chicken in February last year in a bid to tackle inflation.
The artificial price regulations that makes retail very anxious. What comes next?
As long as market uncertainty, inflation, and weak currency remain issues for Hungarians, more and more shoppers will continue to flock to checkouts in Slovakia or Austria. Pablo Gutierrez, CGTN, Bratislava, Slovakia.
The NBA basketball season in the United States might be over, but there's still plenty of action when it comes to the Women's Professional Basketball League. And starting this year, there'll now be 3 Chinese players in the WNBA. Our correspondent Dan Williams reports.
Practice time for the Washington Mystics. The DC-based WNBA franchise is aiming to reach the playoffs once again, having won the championship once back in 2019. Among those on their playing roster for this campaign is China's Li Meng. What had begun as a training camp contract for Meng has since turned into a regular season spot on the team.
I came here to play basketball because I wanted to bring more energy to the team through my ability. I can improve myself and also learn some new and better things to bring back to China and help my Chinese teammates.
Meng has impressed during the minutes she has played on court, scoring her first WNBA points in the game against Chicago Sky. She admits there is still a lot to learn, but she is determined to make an impact and prove her ability.
My biggest challenge is language. At the beginning, the communication was not very smooth. But fortunately, I have a good interpreter who is helping me. So this brings me closer to my teammates every day. And we are slowly building trust and understanding.
Meng is not the only China player taking part in the WNBA this season, with Han Xu playing for the New York Liberty.
Because China came second in last year's World Cup, more WNBA teams see the potential of Chinese players. So we are very honored to be able to come here and train, learn new concepts and new techniques. And then we bring them back to China to improve with other Chinese players together.
Next up for Li Meng as a member of China's national team is the FIBA Asian Cup, which begins on June 26th in Australia. Another strong showing there would further boost the team's confidence ahead of the Paris Olympics next year. Li Meng has set herself some ambitious goals for the next year or so, but her presence here in the WNBA is also expected to inspire the next generation of Chinese talent to also reach for the very top.
I think it will. I think more people like playing basketball now, both boys and girls. So I would like to tell them that you will definitely experience a lot of difficulties and obstacles on your way to chase your dreams. But you should never give up. Stick to your ideas step by step and firmly believe in your heart, and your dream will come true in the end.
Li Meng is already making a name for herself for both her country and franchise, but her potential impact on the sport may extend far beyond the court. Dan Williams, CGTN, Chicago.
Finally, a small island in Denmark has played host to a spectacular display of kites from all around the world. Over 20,000 kites have taken to the skies above the beaches of Fanø. They include traditional Chinese designs such as dragons and some less traditional ones featuring Disney cartoons. It's part of the China to Fanø Culture Week. And that is The World Today. Thank you for watching. We're back with more news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.